Chapter 26. Chapter 26. It took many weeks for Flint Marco to figure out how to reform his body from the mud. After spending day after day in the sewer in agonizing formlessness, it had been plenty of time for him to reflect on many things and also for his hatred to grow. He wanted to kill Spider-Man. He wanted to bury him so deep beneath the sand that not even a construction excavator could dig him up. The freak ruined his life. Turned Flint into some sort of lab rat when the big man had kidnapped him from prison. Now, Flint couldn't even enjoy the simple pleasures that life had to offer. He couldn't eat. He couldn't drink. Hell, he couldn't even have sex. His body was broken beyond repair, and it was all Spider-Man's fault. It was during his time of reflection that a memory popped into his head. It was from his last night in prison, ironically the last night of what he considered to be his freedom. Matt Gargan, the hotshot who had been sharing a cell with him, had told him that there was someone in the prison that he suspected knew the wall crawler's identity. The vulture, Adrian Toombs. He smiled fairly as he waited for the rest of his sandy body to dry from its current damp state. It looks like he was going back to prison. Voluntarily, this time. Peter felt like hell when he woke up the next morning for school. He had gotten little to no sleep agonizing over Spider-Man's conversation with Mary Jane. He hadn't told Aunt May anything of that conversation, choosing to keep it to himself in fear that she would beat him over the head with any object that happened to be closest to her. She just wouldn't understand why he didn't jump at the chance at being with Mary Jane. Hell, he barely understood it himself. All that he could really fixate on as he thought on it was that it all felt massively deceptive toward Mary Jane to keep going on as they were. She had feelings for Spider-Man and Harry. Not Peter. He had to remind himself of that. He stayed in bed for as long as he could before he mustered enough strength to get up and trudge his way through getting ready for the day. Picking out a muted gray sweater, he put it on over a button-down shirt and a pair of dark jeans. Nothing too special. Then, he slicked back his hair in its normal style. Just plain, ordinary Peter Parker. When he walked out of his bedroom, his Aunt May tossed a bagel at him. He had been so focused on his thoughts that he had missed it until it hit him in the face, but he managed to catch it before it hit the floor. Aunt May put her hands to her lips in order to smother her laugh. "I'm sorry. It's just you've got cream cheese on your chin now." She approached Peter with a damp towel and wiped at his chin for him. He gave her a soft smile, but he could tell that his eyes weren't in it. "Thanks, May." She paused at her dabbing and fixed him with a level stare. "What's wrong, Petey?" "Ugh, was he really that transparent?" "Nothing, May. Just overthinking is all." She stared at him for a moment before she gave him a reassuring grin. "Well, don't think too hard now, you'll need to save that brain skill for classes later, Mr. Junior Year." His smile in return was a bit more genuine now. Her eyes got a bit misty as she looked up at him. Her soft hand came up to cup his cheek. "I can't believe you'll be graduating next year. My little Petey is growing up." "May," Peter complained half-heartedly, which only served to encourage her. She clung to his shoulders, mock wailing by throwing her head back and giving dramatic sobs. "My baby boy." He was laughing now. And it felt good, to release a bit of the tension he had been feeling steadily since last night. To put a stop to her antics, he wrapped his arms around her slender shoulders and squeezed. "I love you, May." She squeezed him back just as tightly. "I love you, too," then she sighed and pulled away. "You'd better get going, otherwise you're going to miss the bus." Saluting her, Peter grabbed his backpack from the island counter while replying cheekily, "Yes, ma'am." Laughing, May pushed him out the door. When out in the hall, he paused and looked at the Watsons' door. He knew that they weren't home, but it didn't stop him from being reminded of Mary Jane as he passed by it. He wondered what she was doing right now. Was she getting ready for school? Was she already on her way? He never got a response to his text to her last night, confirming their plans, but reevaluating it, Peter had to admit that his one-word answer to her had been a bit abrupt and an obvious end to the conversation. He sighed. He would text her again on the bus, to ask her where she wanted to meet. Peter took the stairs down two at a time, his breathing not even accelerating from the exercise, but it did help to wake him up a bit from his lack of sleep. He took a bite of the bagel still in his hand as he stepped out into the lobby, nearly finishing it in 3 bites. As he walked out of the building, he froze at the sight of Harry, standing on the sidewalk as he noticed Peter right away. Harry grinned. "Hey, Peter." Peter lifted his hand to wave as he looked past Harry at the sleek, black car he was driven around in. At that moment, the sunroof slid open behind him as Harry said, "Thought you'd like a ride to school?" Ned popped his head out of the sunroof, his eyes wide and excited. "Looks like picking up Ned was the first stop." "Dude," Ned said, awe in his voice, "the back has a seat massager and a heater." Peter gave a little laugh at his old friend's antics before he looked back to Harry. "Sure, that would be great. Thanks." He clapped hands with Harry as he passed. The door was opened for him by the driver. Peter slid in next to Ned while Harry got in next to Peter. The door was closed behind him as the driver made his way around the car. The pristine leather was something that Peter was afraid to touch with anything but his rear end. Peter looked over at Harry. "Are you nervous? It is your first day." The car started moving as Harry shrugged one shoulder. "I never really cared what impression I gave before at all the private boarding schools my parents shipped me off to. But this does feel a bit different. It helps to have you guys here." Softening at the obvious nerves his new friend was experiencing from his first debut to a public school, Peter clapped him on the shoulder reassuringly. "When you arrive at school in this car, you'll definitely have no problems becoming popular at SSD, Harry," Ned chimed in, his hands fiddling with the buttons on the seat heater even when it wasn't yet cold outside. Peter watched him, amused. "I don't know about that," Harry said, ducking his head a bit in modesty and maybe with a smidge of embarrassment. "He's right," Peter said with a small smile, "even Flash won't be immune." Harry's eyes widened for a moment before his head fell back on the seat behind him and he released a long groan with his eyes closed. Both Peter and Ned looked at him with perplexed expressions. "Flash goes to MSSD?" Harry finally asked, his tone stretched thin. "As in Flash Thompson?" Yeah. And he likes to pick on Peter," Ned said at the same time Peter asked, "Do you know him?" Peter shot Ned a look, to which his friend gazed back apologetically. "He picks on you, Peter?" Harry asked, his eyes narrowing as his head shot up, studying Peter with surveying eyes. When Peter looked away and didn't say anything, Harry let out an undignified huff. "He's such a loser, Pete. You should be glad that he doesn't like you. Then you'd have to tolerate him." Harry looked out toward the window with a grimace, watching the side buildings blur by as they passed. "Something tells me that's something that you have to deal with," Peter said, eyeing Harry back now, surprised that Harry's words actually helped. Flash had been a thorn in Peter's side ever since he had met him. And for someone as cool as Harry to call Flash a loser? It felt good. Great, even. Harry rolled his eyes and faced the two of them again. "For basically my entire life. His father is an investor in my dad's company, so I have to see him at all of the charity functions and ritzy parties. The guy is super annoying, he just won't leave me alone." Then Harry paused and pretended to look from side to side for any potential eavesdroppers, before he added in a mock whisper, "Between you and me, he once ripped out a loud one in front of the First Lady and her daughter at the presidential dinner last year. I don't think that I've ever seen him more embarrassed before in my life." They all were laughing, and Peter especially was glad for the mental image of his high school bully humiliating himself in front of the President of the United States family. There was a level of justice somewhere out there in the world. They joked around and talked about what Harry could expect from attending MSSD as well as the anticipation that it was now their junior year. It honestly caused Peter to stagger back a bit the more that he thought on how much his life had changed since his freshman year, when he had been bitten by that spider. All the while, Peter had it in the back of his mind that he still needed to text Mary Jane but couldn't help but think on how awkward it would be to do it in front of Harry, where he could undoubtedly read over his shoulder with their close proximity in the car ride. It was strange to think of Harry as Spider-Man's rival for the affections of one Mary Jane Watson, while he also thought of Harry as Peter Parker's friend. But with everything that he has observed of Harry so far, he could understand Mary Jane's crush on the guy. Because on top of all of the materialistic things that Harry possessed, he was just an overall nice guy. It pained Peter to think that he could never live up to him without revealing his secret identity, showing the world how much good he actually does in the process. But that wasn't something that he could do. Not with everyone that he loves getting put in the direct line of danger if some bad guy found out. He mentally sighed, he was still so confused. The thought of giving up Mary Jane to be with Harry would crush him. Especially since he would have to see them together nearly constantly. Every time he would see them hold hands or, heaven forbid, kiss would be like a knife wound to the chest. It hurt just thinking about the possibility. How could he cope with reality? You still have time to decide. Mary Jane said to take your time, Peter's subconscious reminded him. He cringed at the reminder. Could he really be that selfish as to start dating Mary Jane as Spider-Man without her knowing the truth? And if he did tell her the truth? Would she be angry? Upset that her fantasy had been shattered? Would she laugh at him? He was shaken from his thoughts when they pulled up to school. Harry was the first one out, followed by Peter while Ned got out of the other side. A lot of the surrounding students were eyeing them with a gleam of interest. Ned had been right. Harry would be immediately popular judging by the looks he was getting from the student body campus so far. Harry Osborn just screamed wealthy. A prickle of worry niggled at the back of his mind. Would Harry leave them in the dust as soon as he found cooler friends? Harry paused beside them and looked up at the building. So this is MSST. Then he looked over at Ned and then at Peter. Very different from what I'm used to, but so far, that's a good thing. Ned looked between the building and Harry. How were your other schools? But his question was cut off by the arrival of one Flash Thompson. Osborn. My man, Flash exclaimed too loudly while in such close proximity. He took Harry's hand and forcibly clapped their hands together in a bro-ish sort of way that clearly had Harry cringing at the familiarity. What are you doing here? As Harry gave a noncommittal answer, Peter took the distraction and pulled out his phone to text Mary Jane. Peter, hey, Red. You want to meet at this sandwich shop down the street for lunch? It's not far. It's called Delmar's Deli and Grill. He hit send, but before he could put his phone back in his pocket, it was snatched out of his hand. His head swiveled upward to see Flash looking at his phone. Give it back, Flash. Harry argued, trying to take it back from the boy in question himself. But Flash was able to evade his grasp. Some surrounding people paused to watch the commotion. Come on, Osborn. You don't have to hang out with puny Parker, here. You're too good for him, Flash said as he switched hands with Peter's phone when Harry got too close to snatching it away from him. Harry paused and leveled Flash with a glare. Peter's cool, Flash. The word seemed to echo in his mind. Peter swallowed. No one had ever stood up for him like this before. Ned never had the confidence. Michelle, MJ, always agreed that he was a loser. Betty was essentially indifferent to him. And Liz had been nice to him, but she had always ignored Flash's jibes and never said anything about them. Flash was now laughing. Yeah, right. Good one, Osborn. Parker can't even get invited to a party without making up some lie that he works with Tony Stark or that he knows Spider-Man. But Peter does work with Tony Stark, Ned blurted out on his behalf. Flash ignored him and continued to grin at Harry, as if expecting him to join in on his fun. But Harry didn't laugh. He didn't even look angry. Instead, he looked thoughtful. But before Peter had time to panic that Harry was looking too deeply into the whole Spider-Man comment, he turned to Peter with a set determination in his eyes. Hey, Pete. I've decided that I'm going to have a party on Friday night. You want to come? Peter nearly staggered back in his surprise. Ah. He looked back and forth between Harry and Flash. Yeah. Yes. Sounds like fun. Harry gave him a firm nod before he turned back to Flash. See? Now your point's invalid. Give Peter back his phone. But Flash was now turning his back to them in order to give himself time to look at Peter's phone. What he saw made him throw his head back and laugh. You're talking to a girl, Parker? Hate to break it to you, but you're being catfished, man. It's probably some bot or a creepy dude in his mom's basement. When he was at the right angle, Peter reached out and snatched his phone back from Flash's unassuming hands. Immediately, he stuffed it into his back pocket. His face was now flushed. Flash wasn't exactly being quiet, and there were a few snickers from the surrounding students at his jibes. She's just a friend, Flash. Glee overtook Flash's eyes as he looked at Peter. That makes sense. You couldn't get a girl to go on a date with you no matter what you tried. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Harry's jaw harden as his fists clenched. For a moment, Peter thought that he would have to step forward to stop Harry from hitting the boy in front of them. He didn't want Harry to get suspended on his first day. Peter can get a date, no problem. Flash leered at Harry, a challenge blossoming in his eyes. You want to bet? An equal amount of challenge in Harry blazed on his face as he gave a single nod. And before Peter could interject, Harry said, I do. If Peter brings a date to my party on Friday night, you'll have to. He trailed off, trying to think. Wear a cheerleader's outfit to the homecoming dance. Ned interjected, to which Harry patted Ned on the shoulder in agreement. Guys. Peter tried, but he was ignored. You've got a deal, Osborne, Flash said, extending his arms wide as if in welcome. But if Parker fails, then he's the one that will have to wear the cheer outfit at homecoming. Skirt, pom-poms and all. Then he paused and grinned fairly before he turned on the spot, cupped his hands over his mouth to amplify his voice. He yelled, Peter Parker's got herpes. Then he turned back to look at their stunned faces with a self-satisfied smirk. You never said that I couldn't sabotage. Then he walked away up the steps toward the school, an irritating swagger to his step. I really hate that guy, Harry said to no one in particular, which helped to break Peter out of his stupor. Peter turned on both of his friends. Dude. Why'd you do that? Ned looked a little apologetic once the situation caught up with him, but Harry seemed unconcerned as waved his hand in the air at Peter in a nonchalant manner. Don't worry, Peter. We'll get you a date. I never make bets that I can't win. Peter frowned. But Harry cut him off by putting both of his hands on Peter's shoulders. I've got complete faith in you. Don't sell yourself short. You're a catch and Flash is just jealous of the competition you bring. He was stunned. He stared back at Harry's confident face with something akin to disbelief. Peter wasn't sure what to say. Luckily, he didn't have to, as a group of senior guys approached just then. Are you really having a party? One of them asked, his eyes surveying Harry to try and see if he was serious or not. It was clear that they wanted an invitation. Harry turned to him and nodded with a charming grin. Yes, I'm having a party. And everyone's invited. He said the last part loud enough for the surrounding people to hear, and there were a few cheers of excitement. Harry turned back to Peter and grinned at him before patting him on the back. See? Nothing to worry about. He said as Harry led Peter toward the front entrance as if Peter was the new student and Harry had been the one going there for years now. He got a reply back from Mary Jane sometime in the middle of his chemistry class. He felt his phone vibrate in his pocket during the middle of the orientation lecture, so he wasn't able to check it until class was over. It had burned a hole in his pocket the entire time. When the bell finally rang, Peter whipped out his phone to see the message waiting for him, alleviating some of the anxiousness he had been feeling at the sight. Mary Jane, sure thing, Tiger. Can't wait to catch up so that I can tell you all about my trip. He couldn't help but smile as he read it. He was glad that her conversation with Spider-Man hadn't negatively affected her too much if he was judging off of the vibe she was giving off in her text. But it was probably too soon to tell, and he would have to wait to judge in person. He waited anxiously for lunch to arrive. His leg kept bouncing underneath his desk, and he got a few distinctive glares from others for the distracting habit. But Peter couldn't help it. His body was already chock full of energy, add this anticipation on top of it? It really couldn't be helped. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught MJ, Michelle, drawing him on her notepad with a look of nervous apprehension drawn on his features. He tried to force himself to calm down after that. Not for the first time, he wished that he could go web-swinging right then to exert all of this overwhelming stamina he was feeling. He just about cried out in relief when the lunch bell finally rang. He stuffed his books into his backpack as he jumped to his feet. Hey Peter, Michelle tried to call out to him, but he interrupted, already bounding for the door. Sorry. So sorry, MJ. I've gotta go meet MJ, he yelled over his shoulder as he passed through the doorway. It wasn't until he was far down the hall and halfway to the front doors where Peter realized just how confusing that statement must have sounded to her. It was actually kind of funny the more that he thought about it, and helped to distract him as he made his way to Delmar's. He saw Mary Jane waiting for him outside the shop, her fingers mindlessly playing with the ends of her hair. She looked stunning. She was wearing a black crop top underneath a gray cardigan and a pair of black high-rise jeans, so her midriff was showing. She looked sexy, actually. Seeing her right then made his decision on whether or not to be with her a lot more difficult. Especially at the beaming smile that she gave him when she first noticed his approach on the sidewalk. He felt himself relax and return her smile. When he got close enough, he was surprised when she threw her arms around him. It's good to see you, Tiger. He let out an astonished chuckle as he tightened his own arms around her. It felt really nice. especially when he wasn't hugging her clad head to toe in a thick, spandex suit. "Good to see you too, Red." They pulled back and Mary Jane was still beaming up at him, but there was something else in her gaze. A look of relief in her eyes? He couldn't understand it. He shook his head at her dazzling smile and stepped aside to open the door for her. "You're going to love this place," Peter said as she walked through the open door with a look of thanks flashed in his direction. "Best deli in all of Queens." Mary Jane shot a look at him over her shoulder, her hair dancing along her back with a movement. "That's some high praise, Tiger. I'd better get something exceptional in that case, otherwise, it will be mighty difficult for me to trust your word again." He let out a laugh at that as they approached the counter. He felt something within him ease at their easy banter. He had been afraid that this would be a tense and awkward encounter. But then again, Mary Jane didn't know that he was Spider-Man, so. Delmer eyed the both of them from behind the cash register, a devious glint in his eyes. "Finalmente, entras en mi tienda con una chica hermosa. Estaba empezando a preocuparme." Peter felt his cheeks redden as he shot a look toward Mary Jane. But it was clear that she didn't know Spanish as there was a slight pucker of confusion to her brow. It was cute. Peter looked back at Delmer. "Preocuparse? Cuando todo es tiempo, he estado preguntando por su hija?" Mary Jane shot him a stunned look before morphing so that she only looked impressed. She apparently didn't know that he was nearly fluent in Espanol. Delmer pointed a stern finger at Peter. "For that smart-ass comment, I'm going to double the price on whatever you order." Mary Jane put her fingers to her lips to smother a laugh as Peter threw up placating hands. "No, wait. Delmer. I wasn't serious. Please. The normal rate?" Delmer shook his head mockingly at Peter and further pointed his finger at him. "Keep my daughter out of your mouth, Parker." Mary Jane turned her head away as Peter continued to try and appease the man. "I will. I'm sorry. I promise." The man rolled his eyes at Peter but seemed appeased. "You want your usual?" Peter relaxed and nodded as Delmer then turned to Mary Jane. "And for you, chica?" Mary Jane twisted her lips as she looked up at the menu. "I'll take a number 4 but with no cheese." Delmer nodded, ringing them up. "You got it. That will be $10. Mary Jane reached for her purse to grab her wallet, but Peter put a hand over hers to stop her. "No, wait, Mary Jane. I've got this," he said as he handed Delmer a $10 bill that he had stashed in his back pocket. Mary Jane looked as though she were ready to protest. "I can pay for my own food, Peter." But Delmer was already putting the bill into the register and Peter shot a triumphant grin over Mary Jane's way. "My treat. Think of it as a celebration for your first day in a new school. How's it been so far, by the way?" She softened at this and an excited glint came to her eyes. It was such a contrast to how she looked at Spider-Man the night before, with misty tears in her eyes. "It's been great so far, Tiger. Haven't gotten to any of the juicy stuff yet since it is orientation day, but so far, it looks promising." They were handed their sandwiches and Peter led them outside to where some cafe tables were set out on the sidewalk in front of the shop. They sat down and Peter opened the wrapping around his sandwich, suddenly realizing just how ravenous he actually was. He took a large bite before he realized that Mary Jane was staring at him with a quizzical tilt to her brow. Peter covered his mouth with his hand before asking, "What?" Mary Jane shook her head and went about unwrapping her own sandwich. "It's nothing. Just trying to figure out how much you actually know about what's been going on." It took a moment to try and comprehend what it was that she was talking about before realization dawned. She was talking about the situation with her dad. Peter and his aunt were the ones to pack up her things for her. And Peter was supposed to be Tony Stark's intern. She must have supposed that he was told something. Peter swallowed at his food, taking his time to think. She had told Spider-Man that she wanted honesty from him. Maybe this was the first step towards that. Peter shot her a sheepish glance. "I know quite a bit, actually. Sorry if that makes you uncomfortable." Mary Jane sighed as she shook her head, looking down at her sandwich before she took a small bite. She chewed thoughtfully then swallowed. "No. In a way, I'm kinda glad you already know. It will be nice to have someone else to confide in about all of this." She reached forward and patted his hand that had been resting on the table. He nearly jolted at the touch. He looked back up at her with soft eyes. I know that this can't be easy for you. But just know that I will always be there for you, as a friend that will listen. Mary Jane paused and drew her hand away. She bit her lip and looked down at her lap for a moment. When she looked up at him again, her eyes were a bit red. Thanks, Tiger. I appreciate that. His heart tightened as he watched a bit of some tears gather in her eyes. He subconsciously leaned forward in his seat toward her, his hands raised a bit as if to do something physically to help her. Are you all right? Ugh. Mary Jane exclaimed suddenly as she started wiping at her cheeks with her hands. It was clear that she was embarrassed. Look at me. I've been so emotional lately. She paused and closed her eyes to take a steady breath before releasing it. When she opened her eyes again, the redness had dissipated somewhat. Let's talk about something else. Distract me, Tiger. I'm so sick of thinking about my father. Peter nodded immediately, racking his brain for something to say. When something clicked in his head and it just blurted out of his lips. Did you know that after conquering Persia, Alexander the Great settled there and threw a party with his generals in the palace? But the drinking and partying got so out of hand that Alexander flew into a rage and burned down his own palace. Mary Jane stared at him for a bit too long, to the point Peter was sure that she was suddenly realizing just how much of a nerd he truly was. But then she started to giggle and relax back in her chair, her shoulders not so tense anymore. Now that's a party foul if I ever heard one. Peter grinned at her as she settled down and took another bite of her sandwich. Not quite up to the same par as spilling your drink on someone's lap, is it? Mary Jane shook her head with a smile. No. No, it's not. A thought suddenly struck him as Harry and Flash's faces popped into his mind. He bit his lip, his eyes surveying Mary Jane's face as she ate. He took another bite himself as he thought over it all, trying to either come up with a decision or work up the nerve. He swallowed and cleared his throat so that she looked up at him. Speaking of parties, can I ask you a favor? Setting her sandwich down on the wrapper, Mary Jane shot him a level look. Finally cashing in that favor, huh? Good. It will help to alleviate my guilt. Especially after you and Aunt May packed my things for my temporary living situation. Was she really counting that as another favor? Peter didn't see it that way. He saw it as a part of his responsibility toward keeping her safe. He swallowed and pulled at his collar, which was suddenly too constricting. You see, Harry was being Harry this morning and sort of made a bet on my behalf. Her brows raised in interest. Oh, do tell. His cheeks went a bit pink as he thought of his next words. It was embarrassing to admit to her how inept he truly was with girls. Well. Flash didn't think that I could get a date for Harry's party that he decided to throw on Friday night. Harry bet that I could. Mary Jane was quiet, her brows now drawn downward. She almost looked annoyed. He panicked at the sight of it. Could she see where this was headed and was irritated by the fact that he was even trying? I see. This Flash guy sounds like a real douchebag. What are the terms? His heart soared for a moment. She wasn't annoyed towards him, just angry on his behalf. The loser has to wear a cheer outfit to the homecoming dance. But, the reason why I am telling you about this is because I was wondering if you would go with me? Her face was expressionless as she let out a breath. Peter panicked. Just as friends, of course. The corners of her eyes tightened as she looked down at her lap. All the while, Peter was trying to get a read on her as she seemed to pick at a stray thread on her jeans. When she finally looked back up at him, it was with a soft smile. I really hope that this Flash guy can pull off a skirt, she said, and Peter released a breathy laugh with a whoosh of relief. I do have a curfew to abide by at 10 p.m., but I can come before then. Peter was already nodding. Why, yeah. Totally. I'll make sure that you get home in time. No problem. Mary Jane smiled at him more fully now, before she leaned forward and ruffled her hand through his hair, sending a shockwave through his system at the sensation. Your hair looks better like this, she said by explanation as she released his wild waves from his slick back hair. Then she sat back and looked at him with a satisfied expression on her face. If you're going to be my date, you'd better look the part. She said the last part in her usual teasing tone, but he could tell that she was serious about liking his hair better this way. His own hand went up to his wild locks, feeling the parts of it that stuck up in the air. Then, he shrugged and shot her a grin. Looks like you are saving me money on pomade, Red. Releasing a giggle, she picked up her sandwich again. I live to serve, Tiger. AN, thanks so much for reading. I know that the last chapter was upsetting for some of you out there, but this has all been a part of the plan from the beginning. You gotta trust me. The wait will be well worth it. Please leave a comment/review.